What if Australia's most beloved food isn't Australian at all? Every year, Australians eat close to 300 million meat pies. That's more than 10 pies for every single person in the country. We eat them at footy games, servos, school canteens, funerals, celebrations. We've fought wars with them in our ration packs, but here's the thing almost nobody talks about. The meat pie didn't start here. It didn't even start close to here. Its journey to becoming a national obsession involves ancient empires, forgotten bakers, gold-crazed miners, and a marketing war that changed how an entire country ate. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this simple pie changed Australian culture forever, and why calling it Australian is both completely wrong and completely right. Stick with me here, because this isn't a food story. Not really. It's a story about identity, about how a nation with no single founding cuisine had to invent one, and somehow landed on pastry filled with mince and gravy. To understand how that happened, we have to go back. Way back. Further than you'd think. Where meat pies actually began. Forget Australia for a second. Forget Britain too. The earliest ancestors of the meat pie show up in ancient Egypt, where bakers combined ground meat with oats and honey inside rough pastry shells. But the real breakthrough came from the Greeks and Romans, who figured out something the rest of the ancient world hadn't. You could use pastry not just as food, but as a container. The Romans called it placenta, yes really, and they carried the idea across their empire, into Gaul, into Britain, into every corner they touched. But here's the twist almost nobody knows. For most of history, the pastry itself wasn't even meant to be eaten. It was a cooking vessel, a disposable shell called a coffin, literally the origin of our word coffin, designed purely to seal in moisture and protect the meat while it's slow cooked over open fires. People would crack it open, eat the filling, and toss the crust to servants, dogs, or the poor. Imagine that. The best part of the pie was originally the bit nobody wanted. It would take centuries, war, famine, and clever bakers before someone realized the container was just as good as what was inside it. And that realization would end up on the other side of the planet, in a country that didn't even exist yet. How they traveled across the world. By the medieval period, the meat pie had transformed. English bakers began enriching the pastry with butter and lard, turning it from a cooking shell into something worth eating on its own. Meat pies became working-class fuel, cheap, portable, filling. You could eat one with your hands, in the cold, on the move, no table, no cutlery, no time wasted. They spread through markets, taverns, and street stalls across England, evolving regional identities. Melton Mowbray pork pies, Cornish pasties for miners, steak and kidney pies for pubgoers. And then, in the late 1700s and early 1800s, something happened that would launch the meat pie across the entire globe. The British Empire needed to feed its colonies. Ships loaded with settlers, convicts, soldiers, and hopeful migrants set sail for a strange, sunburnt land on the far side of the world. And they carried more than just belongings. They carried recipes, habits, comfort food from home. One of those ships was heading somewhere that would change the meat pie forever. Australia. Arrival in Australia. Picture Sydney Cove in the late 1700s. Heat nobody expected, flies nobody could escape, food shortages that pushed the colony to the brink of starvation. In that chaos, British settlers clung to whatever familiar comforts they could recreate. And the meat pie was one of the easiest things to make with basic ingredients: flour, fat, and whatever meat was available. At first, it wasn't a celebrated national dish. It was survival food. Practical, cheap. A way to stretch scarce meat further by wrapping it in pastry. But something was about to happen that would turn this humble survival snack into a full-blown obsession. Gold. Why Australians became obsessed. In 1851, gold was discovered in Victoria and New South Wales, and almost overnight, the colony exploded. Hundreds of thousands of people flooded in from across the world, chasing fortune in the goldfields, and when you're digging in the dirt from sunrise to sunset, you don't have time to cook a proper meal. You need something you can eat with one hand, something that doesn't need a plate, something that survives being shoved in a pocket, jostled on a horse, or eaten standing in mud. The meat pie was perfect. Bakers set up shop near goldfields and mining towns, selling pies by the hundreds to exhausted, hungry workers. It was cheap, it was filling, it didn't spoil in a day, and it fit in your hand like it was made for exactly this life. This is the moment the meat pie stopped being something British settlers brought with them and started becoming something distinctly Australian. But the story doesn't stop at the goldfields, because the next chapter involves war, and something you'd never expect a pie to be responsible for. War, gold rush, and football culture. During the First and Second World Wars, meat pies became part of military rations and army camp meals. Comfort food that reminded soldiers of home while they were fighting overseas in places that felt like a different universe. But the moment that truly cemented the pie's place in Australian culture wasn't on a battlefield. It was on a football field. In the early 1900s, as Australian rules football exploded in popularity, spectators needed something to eat during matches. Something hot, cheap, and easy to hold while cheering. The meat pie became the unofficial food of the footy. By the 1950s and 60s, footy pies were a staple at every VFL and AFL match across the country. The smell of meat pies and sauce became inseparable from Saturday afternoons at the footy. A sensory memory burned into generations of Australians. And that connection between food and identity is about to explode into a full-blown pie war. Famous pie brands and bakeries. As demand grew, small local bakeries began competing to create the ultimate Australian pie. Brands like 4 and 20 emerged in the 1940s in Bendigo, Victoria, eventually becoming one of the most recognised meat pie brands in the country. A name so tied to footy culture that saying pie and sauce practically means 4 and 20 to a lot of Australians. Sergeant's Pies, founded even earlier, became another giant of the industry, supplying pies across Australia for over a century. Meanwhile, independent bakeries in country towns began entering pie competitions, some so fiercely contested that winning Australia's best pie became genuine local pride. Entire towns rallying behind their baker like they were representing the nation at the Olympics. But here's where things get interesting. Because despite the fierce competition, almost nobody agrees on what actually makes a real Aussie meat pie. Surprising facts most Australians don't know. Here's something that might genuinely surprise you. The pie floater, a meat pie dropped into a bowl of thick pea soup, is a South Australian invention so beloved that food carts in Adelaide still serve it late at night to this day. Another fact most people don't know: Australians eat more meat pies per capita than almost any other country on Earth. And yet the meat pie's true origins trace back through Rome, medieval England, and colonial necessity, not Australian invention at all. And here's the twist that puts it all into perspective. The reason the meat pie became Australian isn't because we invented it. It's because we adopted it during our most defining moments: survival in a new colony, chaos of the gold rush, mateship in war, and passion on the footy field, and made it mean something new. We didn't create the pie. We gave it a soul. Modern meat pie industry. Today, the Australian meat pie industry is worth hundreds of millions of dollars a year, supplying servos, bakeries, supermarkets, and stadiums across the country. Bakers now experiment with gourmet flavors: butter chicken pies, vegan lentil pies, kangaroo pies, pushing the humble pastry into new cultural territory while somehow keeping its working-class soul intact. Meat pies have become so tied to Australian identity that international visitors are often told, only half-jokingly, that trying an Aussie meat pie is practically a rite of passage, as essential as seeing the outback or hearing someone yell, "Have a go, you mug," at the cricket. But underneath the branding, the competitions, and the servo pie warmers, there's something deeper going on, something that explains why this food, out of everything we could have chosen, became the one that stuck. Think about what the meat pie actually represents. It's not fancy, it's not glamorous, it wasn't invented here, and it doesn't pretend to be anything more than what it is: Pastry, meat, and gravy, eaten standing up, usually in a hurry. But maybe that's exactly why it became us. Australia was built by people who didn't have time for pretense. Convicts, settlers, gold miners, soldiers, working-class battlers who needed something that filled you up, cost little, and didn't ask for anything in return except a bit of tomato sauce on top. The meat pie survived shipwrecked colonies. It fed men digging for gold with trembling hands. It traveled in soldiers' kits to wars fought on the other side of the world. It sat in the palm of a stadium full of strangers, all cheering for the same team, all eating the same humble food. It became Australian not because of where it was born, but because of what it went through to get here. And maybe that's the most Australian story of all.